Hello and welcome to another You Are My Boro, where we're going to talk everything Middlesbrough with myself, Scott Wilson, and Dom Shaw from the Northern Echo. Hiya, Dom. You well?
Yes, I'll make yourself.
I'm very well. I'm very well. I'm going to start the video and the pod by this. This will mean nothing if you're listening to it on a podcast version, but if you're watching the video, I'm going to start by apologising because we've set it up slightly differently. We had a bit of a technical issue starting it. And we're the wrong way around, aren't we? It's like Ant and Dec appearing on the other side of each other for the first time ever. I think if you're watching it, we've magically swapped places, Dom. I'm not sure if I like it.
I didn't know where you were going with that there when you started, and I'm thinking of have I done something here? Is there something in the background that isn't?
Yeah. No,
yeah, we like to keep our viewers on their toes, don't we?
Exactly. So exactly. Yeah, that's what we'll start doing. We'll start throwing a quiz in of which way around we are and who's doing what.
Just to jump in there, actually, you mentioned their podcast. We're finally on the Apple platform. So for anyone who watches this and wants to listen to the pods, we've been available on Spotify and Amazon for a couple of months. But yeah, we're finally on Apple. That's available now. All the episodes we've done so far, including obviously our special with Sol Bamba last week's on there. So you can listen back to some of the specials if you missed them. But yeah, subscribe. Leave us a rating and review, spread the word.
Yeah, you've been wrestling with the tech giants, Dom, to get that sorted. So well done, pat on the back.
Finally got the green light after a red tape wrangle, as one of my former colleagues used to. That's
exactly. Hey, if it's a transfer window, then there's definitely time for a red. Oh, that's deadline day. Really, is red tape wrangle, isn't it?
Yeah, we've got
by the fax machine.
Transfer talk. It's a good way to start, really, isn't it?
Let's get in. That's what this week's going to be about, really. Transfer talk special. We've waffled around about transfers so far this summer without really having anything to really get our teeth into. But things have cranked up massively in the last week or so for Boro. One deal done, another couple pretty much in the pipeline, so we're led to believe, and then another couple that are maybe gathering pace as well. So let's start with here's another transfer bingo. Let's start with the done deal, which is Alex Gilbert from Brentford, Republic of Ireland Youth International striker, or certainly a forward. Spent last season with Brentford's B team, top scorer for them as they won the Premier League Cup. Their player of the year as well to boot. He was offered a new deal at Brentford. By all accounts, certainly speak to people down there, and they were pretty keen to keep him. But he decided that his career wasn't really going where he wanted it to at Brentford. Obviously, first-team football, pretty hard to come by there, even with the Ivan Toney ban situation. So he's decided to head to Boro. And I guess the interesting thing, Dom, and to be fair, we've had a couple of questions in about this, both for Gilbert precisely, but also in the wider picture. But what do you think we're talking here with Alex Gilbert? Are we talking a Chris Wilder style development signing, or are we talking a player who is ready to go into the first team and potentially could be leading the line for Boro on the first day of the season, given obviously there's no Cameron Archer, there's no obvious number 9 at the moment? Where do you think we're framing this one?
I think all of the, and we're going to touch on all of the players, Gilbert who's signed and those who look very likely to follow in the coming days and weeks. I think with certainly 2 or 3 of them, that there is going to be a question as to are they ready to go straight into the first team. Now I think it's clear that they'll be signed for the first team. Now it's whether they're ready to immediately make the transition into first team football week in, week out. Gilbert's an interesting one because he said in the interview with the club that playing for Brentford B is different to playing normal 23s football because they're not in the league as such. Obviously they're in the Premier League Cup, which you mentioned, which they won. Because they're not in the league, they play friendlies against teams from around Europe, really. So he said he played against Monaco and PSV in tournaments in Portugal. So in his eyes, that makes him more equipped
further down the line,
now make the step into first team football. And he made it clear in his interview that he's come to play first team and to get minutes. But he didn't. What he didn't say was I think there was an understanding there that there might be a bit of a transition needed. I think what's interesting as well is when he talks about kind of what he's going to offer, it sounds like he's extremely versatile. He said he's a number 10. He's comfortable off either flank, a little bit deeper, and the pulling power of Michael Carrick, which I think's a recurring theme really that we'll come back to again and again over the summer, when he talked about the FaceTime call he had with Carrick and how Carrick talked at length about how he sees him fitting in and where he'll play, which I guess tells you really that he's absolutely part of Michael Carrick's plans. And this isn't a signing that I think we've moved on from that, haven't we now, from last season? The kind of club signings and the managers.
Yeah.
We sat down with Kieran Scott, didn't we, in December, and he talked about how everyone's pulling in the same direction now. The club now is kind of where he wanted it to be when he came in. So I don't think there's any issues this year about players coming in as to who's signed them. No. And I think Gilbert talking about what Carrick told him in this FaceTime call is evidence of that.
I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right. I think there's no doubt that Michael Carrick is fully behind what Boro are trying to do here. And I guess, in terms of, is Gilbert ready? Are any of the other signings who might be coming in ready? We'll see a lot of that once pre-season starts. Yeah. Well, that's the whole point of pre-season. Boro have 6 games coming up. You would imagine he'll be involved in pretty much all 6, unless Michael Carrick decides to really chop and change. I guess the Pools and York games obviously are back-to-back. Same players probably won't play in both of them, but he'll play in most of them, and that'll give us an idea. But having said that, if we assume that Chuba is going to remain as primarily a number 10 this season, which you would imagine, given how well things went last season, that will be the ideal scenario starting out, then we've got Gilbert, we've got Coburn, who, he's done it a different way because he's obviously been out on loan at Bristol Rovers. But you could make the argument, is it a broadly similar place in his career as Gilbert is? You've got Force, who is that little bit further down the line, but obviously hasn't been playing as a number 9, or certainly wasn't for most of last season. You've got Matthew Hoppy, who's still in and around the place, but nobody's really sure what his long-term future is. You've got a lot of options there, but it still feels like you stick on number 9 is probably not part of them. Is that fair enough?
I think so. I mean, at the start of the summer, the 2 areas that looked like the absolute priorities were obviously in goal and I think up front as well. Now, as you said, Josh Coburn has come back from Bristol Rovers. We haven't had the chance to speak to Michael Carrick yet this summer. He might well have been blown away by Coburn in pre-season. Marcus Force played most of his football as a centre forward in the first couple of months under Carrick, obviously before he moved out to the right. I think it'd be a surprise to see Force moved back to the centre, because as a lead in number 9, because if that was where Carrick saw him playing, then I don't think he'd have shifted him to the right in the first place. There's obviously Matt Crooks, but while Crooks is a hugely effective squad player, I'm not sure whether he's kind of the line lead in number 9 for a team that are looking to win promotion. And he admitted himself, didn't he, when he got moved up front, he's still getting used to that role. I think what'll be interesting is we know that what Boro don't want to do this coming season is find themselves in a position that they did last season, where come the end of the season, they've got 5 or 6 loan players going back. Now, that doesn't mean that Boro aren't going to use the loan market. I wouldn't be at all surprised, for example, if Aaron Ramsey was to come in before the end of the summer. I still think he looks the most likely of those who were here last season. The Cameron Archer return still feels a long shot at this stage, doesn't it? But is up front an area where Boro are perhaps going to look to make use of the loan market, or do they have something up the sleeve? Because let's be honest, a week 10 days ago, none of these names have been floating around. So equally, a name might emerge in the next few days that we've heard absolutely nothing about, because if they've done it in other positions, why wouldn't they do it up front as well?
Listen, that's a definite possibility. I think that all I would say is I think maybe part of the reason we haven't necessarily heard a lot about these names is because of the type of player that they've been going for. Now, if they're going to be going for a more established number 9 and paying, let's say, 5 million, 6 million, 7 million, whatever for them, you'd feel that's much more likely that that's the kind of name that would start getting out there because there's more agents involved, there's more money involved, etc., etc. I'm with you though. I think what, you know, the fact that we've said that there are options there now. All right, there's not necessarily one you would hang your hat on and say that's going to be your number 9, but there are options. I think what it means is that Boro can almost now make do for those first couple of weeks of the season if they have to, on the understanding that a Premier League loan might well become available in the last week of the window that is really appealing. And Boro now have the flexibility, I think, to be able to sit tight and potentially do that kind of deal. Hey, it might be Cameron Archer on deadline day if Villa decide, you know what, he's not going to get a game here. You know what I mean? I think Boro now have the ability to just sit and wait for that because they've got options there, you know, and they can get through those first couple of weeks of the season.
And I think the other thing is, like, let's be honest, you want a centre forward who you're going to hang your hat on. In the second half of last season, there's probably, you know, Cameron Archer was right in the conversation for the championship forwards that you'd most want in your team, wouldn't he? But that said, and you made the point, didn't you, with Chuba in a few pieces that you wrote last season, if Chuba was to suddenly stop scoring, then it didn't really matter in the whole scheme of things because there was goals coming from everywhere. Now, I know it's not just about goals, is it? It's about what the striker gives you. And I thought Archer was so effective. I mean, he was so strong, wasn't he, for his figure? And in that podcast Isaiah Jones did last week, which was really good, he described him as a championship cheat code, and you can see exactly what he means, can't you? You know, replacing Cameron Archer is some challenge. But given that Boro have known really throughout the second half of the season that if they didn't go up, the chances were Archer would have to be replaced. I think it's more likely that Boro have something up the sleeve. And what I don't think we'll see is Boro in a position like Sunderland were really in the final stage of the January window. And I know their hands were tied here because it was all because of Ross Stewart's injury. But where Sunderland were desperately scratching around. I don't foresee that for 1 minute because this is a situation that Boro have known was going to come throughout the second half of the season. So I think something. I might be wrong, but I think a striker, if it's still an area which Boro want to strengthen, which you'd expect to be the case, I think there'll be one in before the start of the season. Because it's still early, isn't it? I mean, it's still.
Well, that's it. Listen, we're a good month off the start of the season yet. And I agree with the slight caveat, like I say, that if they are thinking Premier League loan, which I still think they might well be for striker, then that tends to be the later one, doesn't it? Because that week later. Quite often they're on the other side of the world come the end of July looking at these players, and then you're getting into August, and that's when they're making the decisions on their squads. But we'll see. Other end of the pitch, and obviously, you know, Boro have looked at various keepers. We know that there was discussions with Carl Darlow. That's obviously become more and more complicated as more clubs have got involved in that. There was always Hull. Blackburn got involved. Bournemouth are now involved. Leeds are now involved. It looks like Boro have moved away from that. We know that they've looked at Seny Dieng at QPR. There's been talks there. But again, for what we're hearing is, you know, a number of different reasons. It doesn't necessarily sound like that's the way Boro are going to go now. So Tom Glover is the latest name that's appeared on the scene. Australian, 25, was at Melbourne City last year, but has opted not to sign a new deal with them. Has been pretty clear that he wants to test himself in Europe. He wants a new challenge. He's got links to this country. A lot of it adds up. You know, we're certainly led to believe that there is genuine, strong interest there from Boro, and this is one that could happen relatively quickly if they can get the green light to make it happen. The same questions really lend itself to that, as we've discussed with Gilbert, isn't he? I mean, where do you see him in terms of what Boro want for a kid? I mean, you know, is he the one that will come in to replace Zach Steffen if Boro can make it happen?
I can't say I've seen a lot, if any, of Tom Glover. If the name rings a bell to those watching and listening, Tom Glover was the keeper who was concussed when a bucket was thrown at him when there was a riot at a pitch invasion when Melbourne City played Melbourne Victory last season. A flare was thrown on the pitch, and he'd thrown it off the pitch, and it went into the stands, and then a riot ensued from there. So I can't say I've seen a lot of him, but he was called up to play for Australia. He was called up to the Australian squad last month alongside Riley McGree for the game against Argentina. He's been a number one at Melbourne since he went there in 2019, having come through the ranks at Tottenham. And he made it clear at the end of the season, Melbourne were desperate to keep him, but he made it clear he wanted to return to Europe. Just on all that, you wouldn't think that he'd be coming in content with the idea of being a number two and someone else.
It doesn't feel like that, does it? It doesn't feel like he's a player who's at this. You know, when Boro signed Liam Roberts last summer from Northampton, coming out of League Two, it was pretty obvious that he was going to be coming in as a number two. That's his role, you know, and he can live with that certainly for his first season in the Boro ranks. Doesn't feel like that with Glover, does it? With the record that you say like he has. I mean, you know, he's going to be wanting to be Australia's number one and play in the next World Cup, isn't he? Well, he's not going to do that sitting on the bench at Boro.
That's it. And I saw some quotes from Melbourne's boss at the back end of the season, and he'd said he's growing into a really good goalkeeper. He's way off his best, as many young goalkeepers are. They can go well into the 30s. There's so much ahead of him. So there's clearly really high hopes for him. Again, I guess the proof will be in the pudding. But Dieng, like you said there, as we understand, that looks unlikely now. Although there was discussions there, and Darlow, you know, clearly was on Boro's radar. The complicating factor there is the fact that so many clubs are now clearly in for him, and Newcastle are likely to use that as a bit of a bargaining tool for a bidding war, really, aren't they?
You've got the lure of Premier League football at Bournemouth, and then the fact that Leeds are now is interesting, because I always felt Boro would have a chance because Darlow's got a family. He's properly based in the northeast. I thought that would have played into Boro's favour. Leeds can pretty much offer the same thing, but arguably double the wages that Boro can offer with their Premier League parachute payments, etc., etc. So, yeah, I think that while Boro clearly were pushing for Darlow, I think events have just conspired against them, really.
Sorry, mate, it broke up there. Sorry, just say that last bit again.
Yeah, I was saying that I think events just conspired against them. I think that you know, it's proved a deal that really just can't be done from Boro's point of view. So that's fair enough. Now, I guess, like you say, you've got to trust the process. You've got to trust the scout. And if they think that Glover is ready to be their number one, then you've got to go with that, haven't you?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think kind of what's emerged really in the last week is it's clear Boro are looking to exploit areas or leagues that are perhaps left alone or neglected by some clubs or some championship rivals. We know Sunderland went to Central Coast Mariners and signed the defender Nectar Triantis, and there was big hopes there in Australia for him, weren't there? And obviously now Boro look like they're going to sign Triantis' former teammate Sammy Silvera, who again had Triantis had a big breakthrough season last season. So I think that's exciting, and what you kind of look at is for years and years, you look at kind of recruitment models like Brentford's or Norwich's, and that's held up, isn't it, as the model that so many clubs want to follow. You know, buy players young with huge growth area and potential at relatively low cost, and obviously develop them as Michael Carrick and Middlesbrough are hoping to. So I think it's hugely exciting. What'll be interesting is whether, as the summer develops, there's a balance between those type of players and one or two slightly more experienced, maybe not championship hardened, but you know what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
Or whether Carrick feels there's already enough of that in his squad.
Well, and I mean, I guess if you look at Sunderland last season, you'd say that there probably is enough of that already in the Boro squad, because Sunderland literally really had a squad made up of that and managed to get themselves into the playoffs. So Boro, as we were kept on saying at the end of last season, have gone into this summer with a really strong core. They've got a very good base. They've got a lot of experience in that squad, a lot of talent in that squad. So I guess if there was ever a club going to be in a position to start you know, I'm not going to say having a bit of a gamble, but signing the type of development players or players with potential or unproven players that it looks like the route they're going to go down, then at least Boro are starting with a really good core to add that to. And you know, it clearly is the way that they're wanting to go. It's clearly the way that Kieran Scott felt they should go. And it is a big change from the transfer windows under Wilder and Warnock, where it was championship names, it was, you know, players that we've all heard of, players that we've all watched, clubs with the greatest will in the world that were able to then charge a premium for those players. And so when they arrived to Boro, you know, the scope isn't necessarily there for a sell-on fee or the ability to develop those players and make a profit. You know, it sounds like a model that should work and that almost every club should be adopting. Clearly, the reason every club don't adopt it is it's not risk-free in that you're bringing in a lot of players who have never experienced championship football. A lot of them young, haven't necessarily played away from the country they were brought up in. So there's risks there. But I think you speak to most Boro fans and they think that this is the way that the club should now be going. And if nothing else, what I think we've all been crying out for is some kind of plan, some kind of policy, some kind of overarching idea that we can all buy into and get behind. And at least that seems to be there now, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I think Kieran Scott's been at the club for a couple of years now, hasn't he? But I think this is probably the first window in which he's kind of truly able to put his touch on things now, and things are working maybe how he envisaged and how he pitched when he came in. We know he's kind of overhauled the scouting department, and there's been 3 or 4 arrivals in the last year or so there. When you look back at the windows from the last couple of years, the first windows were when Chris Wilder was manager. Well, we know the kind of difficulties that arose there, really, and that the Boro were coming at it from 2 angles, weren't they? As we've discussed at length on here, there were certain players that Wilder wanted, similar but not to the extremes of when Neil Warnock was in charge. Now, obviously, Carrick was in place before the January window, but January's tough, isn't it? You know, January isn't a window in which you can nail down a vision and a blueprint and whatever else.
It's solving problems, isn't it? I think Dan Barlaser was one that kind of fits the bill, if you like, and you know, was a signing clearly that everyone wanted to make. Ramsey and Archer were brilliant loan signings, but had to be because there were gaps there that just needed to be plugged, weren't they? They had to solve those problems. And if you
don't get Cameron Archer, and if you go looking for a centre forward in January, well, how much are you going to have to pay? If you're a selling club and you know that a championship club chasing promotion who was in need of centre forward are coming knocking, you know, you're going to pay a ridiculous January premium, aren't you? So I think with that in mind, this is the first window really in which we're kind of truly getting an idea of how Boro want to operate. And even a couple of weeks ago on here, we were saying, weren't we, that what's interesting is because of the lack of links coming out and the lack of reports and speculation, it was hard to kind of pin down exactly what Boro's approach was going to look like. Whereas now, clearly, over the last few days, when it's burst into life, really, we now have a very good idea.
And you mentioned Silvera there, so let's touch on 2 deals, you know, like the Glover one that we're led to believe are certainly the cogs are in motion for them. That is Silvera, Australian, as you say, winger, Central Coast Mariners. Boro definitely been pushing hard for that one of a number of different clubs, both within the championship, Scotland with Hearts, Japan, we've been led to believe that effectively had bids accepted for Silvera, but the very, very strong indications from Australia are that he wants to come to Boro, he wants to join the Carrick project, as it were. So talks are ongoing there to try to make that happen. And then the other one is Raj van den Berg, young Dutch centre-half who's been playing second-team football with PSV Eindhoven, but Boro clearly feel is ready now for the step across to England and to play into the Championship. I mean, 2 more signings that pretty much fit all the bills that we've been talking about, tick all those boxes, and you know, we're led to believe could be you know, relatively imminent in terms of Boro working hard to make them happen.
Yeah, and there seems to have been plenty of interest in both, especially in the case of Van den Berg. It sounds like there's clubs across Europe, and there's suggestions that he was close to joining Roma in January, Borussia Dortmund have been linked, and several other clubs. Yeah, so I mean, if that goes through, which would, you know, I say if that's going to go through, isn't it? That's going to happen.
It sounds like from what we told.
Then that looks like an impressive signing. Now, what I would say there, I know we're talking about kind of players being ready. You would expect he'll be part of the first team picture this season, but I think coming from playing in the Dutch second tier last season, there'll be an understanding and a patience, won't there, that you know, we'll give Van den Berg the time and the opportunity to settle in and get his feet under the table. And let's be honest, because of Boro's options at the back, he can do that, can't he? Boro aren't particularly stretched in any area. We know he can play at centre half, right back, or even left back. But it's not an area where you think Boro are absolutely crying out for new recruits. And then Silvera, yeah, again, you'd said there that Hearts were clearly in for him. The fact there was strong noises from Scotland earlier in this week or the back end of last week kind of suggested that Hearts were keen to make it known that they were maybe going to be priced out of it. I think the interest from the English clubs was done that. And we were having a chat earlier this week, weren't we? Plymouth and Stoke are in for him. Now, as well, with no disrespect to those clubs, at the minute, it'd be hard to make a case for Plymouth or Stoke being a more attractive proposition than Boro.
Yeah, unless they're going to pay you double.
Yeah.
Which, you know, I completely agree. I think the only reason that you would choose either Stoke or Plymouth above Boro at the moment is if they were throwing, you know, vastly different amount of sums at you now.
I mean, we know
Plymouth would be.
No.
Stoke are a funny club. Every now and then they seem to find money from somewhere to overpay massively to bring someone in. But, you know, you'd like to think that even if they were willing to do that, a player, you know, of Silvera's age and development potential and profile will be more interested in where his career could take him. And you're absolutely right. At the minute, you would think that Boro was a no-brainer. And it, you know, it sounds like they're certainly there at the front of the queue. But as we're ever with these things, there'll be things that need wrapping up before the deal actually happens. But, you know, he's one that's... I think you're right with Van den Berg. I think that Van den Berg, you would imagine, will come in, you know, cliche time again, but centre-halves often, you know, young defenders probably need that little bit more time to get used to what the Championship's all about. And as you say, Boro have the luxury of having McNair, Fry and Lenihan to fill two of their three centre-half positions. So, you know, they can afford to take it slowly with him. If Silvera comes in, a winger, slightly more advanced stage of his career, you would imagine he'll be in and around pitching for a first-team spot from the word go, really, given that, you know, the way that his career is at a more advanced stage already. I mean, he scored and got an assist in the A-League final last month. So, you know, while clearly the Australian League is not directly comparable to the Championship, that's still a pretty decent level of football he's been playing at thus far.
It's an Aussie takeover, isn't it? And I know then you look back and you think about Schwarzer and Mark Viduka. Do you think that is also appealing to these players? If you're a young Australian player coming through and you hear of Middlesbrough's interest, and you'll be well aware that Viduka's played there and Schwartz's played there, and even players like Luke Wiltshire, who was an Australian international for God knows how long and went on to play Champions League football. Do you think, as well as the Michael Carrick factor that we've talked about, and the fact that Boro really have always had pulling power, but do you think that's also a factor?
I think it's a factor in the, you know, if you're a young 20-year-old Australian, you probably have heard of Middlesbrough in a different way than you've heard of, say, Stoke or Plymouth. You're probably aware of it. I think a more relevant factor is Riley McGree.
Yeah.
And the fact that, you know, a leading Australia international of the current day is playing for Middlesbrough and is proving that, you know, it's a good environment to be in and to catch the eye of the Australian selectors and to get into the national team. McGree will clearly know these players. I'm led to believe that, you know, that as you would expect, once it's got to the stage where Boro are able to use McGree, in that they've been given the green light to speak to the player and his representatives, they have used McGree or will use McGree, to have that conversation. And hey, why wouldn't you? So I think that's a big factor. If you're if you're a young kind of unproven Aussie, but you know that McGree is there and he's telling you, yeah, it's a great environment, it's this, that, the other, Michael Carrick's brilliant, then that's got to have a lot of sway because, as we saw from the last World Cup, McGree is one of Australia's big stars, isn't he?
Yeah, and like you say, that happens, doesn't it? Gareth Southgate's talked about it this summer, hasn't he? About how, there's loads of transfer conversations that go on when they're
away on international duty. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, there's players with Newcastle. Callum Wilson was tagging James Maddison on Instagram at the time when Newcastle were in for him, weren't they? That does go on, and yeah, I agree. The way, and the other thing is, you look at not just the fact that McGree is a leading light for Australia, but the fact that the way he's clearly progressed since he came to Boro and under Michael Carrick as well. Because he's definitely one of the players who's gone to a new level, gone to another level under Carrick, isn't he?
So let's kind of wrap. So that's the transfers. I mean, obviously Boro are out in Portugal at the moment. They're training on the Algarve. They're going to have a behind closed doors game at some stage at the back end of this week against Vitória Guimarães. They then come back. They'll have another week at Rockcliffe next week, and then we're into it in terms of pre-season games. Hartlepool on the Friday night, York on the Saturday. You would imagine it'll be split teams, split squads across those two games, and then it kind of rolls on from there. So, we're in the kind of running fitness, get everyone back, get everyone together phase of pre-season, but we're quite soon going to get into the games, and we can actually start to see, hopefully, some of these players, which will obviously be exciting, and it just all cranks up a bit more then, doesn't it, Dom? Yeah,
it does, doesn't it? What are your standout Boro pre-season memories? I remember being at Bishop Auckland a couple of years back.
Yeah.
Uche Piezu scored an absolute worldie on his debut, a dipping volley from distance.
Yeah, I was at that game as well at Bishop.
And I remember being at Hartlepool once, and I think Emmanuel Ledesma had made his debut, or it was one of his first games. And afterwards, Tony Mowbray was asked whether he can follow in the footsteps of another South American and maybe establish himself as a favourite like Juninho. And you can imagine Mowbray saying, whoa.
Yeah.
Let's settle down. I think that was George Friend's debut. I think that was the first time, or certainly one of his first games, the first time I'd seen George play for Boro.
They stand out. I remember... and I'm pretty sure this was a pre-season game. You might put me wrong here, but for not very good reasons, Alex Baptiste with that horrible injury.
York.
Can you remember that?
Yeah.
That was a really grim one. That was one, where you knew as soon as it happened, it was really bad. And you went to speak to people after the game, and it was just it's such a dark cloud had descended because everybody knew that was a really, really serious injury, which is clearly the one thing above everything else you don't want from pre-season games. And then I also just remember being on touchlines with Aitor Karanka kind of dancing around who they're looking at, who he's trying to sign, what he's doing, and him trying to give you absolutely nothing and stay as silent as he possibly could on it. I have definite memories of that.
Yeah, absolutely. That Baptiste one, I remember that. And I remember speaking to Karanka afterwards, and like you say, that overshadowed the full game, understandably, didn't it? That was a bad one. But yeah, I think this year,
it's often reading between the lines. Sorry, it's often reading between the lines as well, because the other one that stands out is, and I don't know if you were there, was the Neil Warnock one when they were chasing after Muniz.
Oh yeah.
And obviously it had come out that I think it was Neil Bowser, wasn't it? Was over in Brazil trying to do that deal, or he'd gone to the Middle East as well. I think it was the agents over there, and we're asking Neil Warnock about that. What's kind of going on here? And Neil Warnock said, "Well, you better ask the chief executive, because it sounds like you have more idea of where he is than I have." So straight away, you know that there's issues going on there. It's we're only in pre-season, and then if there's two hymn sheets, then they're certainly singing off different ones here.
Yeah,
because it's the first time we've seen them for a while, isn't it? So and it's the one chance a manager's got to kind of draw his line in the sand and say, no, I'm not happy with this, or we need this, we need that. Now, I don't for 1 second think we'll get that this summer with Michael Carrick. For, you know, A, I don't think it's him, and B, everything we're hearing is that there's none of those kind of tensions. But pre-season's often the time when those tensions start coming to the boil, and you first get wind of them, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. I remember just on the transfer front as well. I think, and I'd have to double check back, I think it was a Johnson's Paint game rather than a pre-season friendly. Right. The night when Boro signed Adama Traore, and didn't know that much of just the fact he's a former Barcelona kid.
Yeah.
Little did we know at the time the excitement that he'd give us over the years.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, like you said, I don't think there'll be any. I certainly don't think there'll be any of that from Michael Carrick that you talked about there.
The other entertaining one with pre-season, which again I don't think we'll get this time. Trialist A, Trialist B, Trialist C. Love a bit of that.
You won't get it from Boro, but you're likely to get it from other clubs.
Oh, yeah.
York, isn't it? And
yeah.
Trialist there crunched into a midfield challenge with Johnny Howson.
Exactly, yeah.
Last year, funnily enough, at York, I remember being at York, and we got in position before the game, and some fella came around and was like coming over and shaking everyone's hands and saying hello. But he didn't introduce himself. He was kind of really overly friendly, but didn't introduce himself. And it was only afterwards I realised it was York's new owner. He just taken he was going down
team sheets.
Yeah. I think he's gone. Has there been a takeover since?
I think there has. Yeah, at least one probably. But I mean, a couple of new things. Obviously, Boro fans, Chesterfield. That's a relatively new ground, isn't it? And that's an interesting one. Obviously, you know, where would you dream of playing La Liga giants Real Betis in a friendly game? Where else other than Chesterfield?
Chesterfield, yeah, that's an interesting one, isn't it? So we know there the Betis are obviously based at St George's.
St George's, yeah. It makes sense. It makes absolute sense. But it's let's say Chesterfield to watch Boro play Betis.
Yeah, when you sit down at the start of the summer and plan how pre-season is likely to look, I don't think me or you said, well, that might be when Boro play a Spanish top side.
Betis and Chesterfield, exactly.
If anything, the fact that even though it's not against Chesterfield, the fact it is at Chesterfield gives us a chance to watch back that FA Cup semi-final for the 5,000th time.
Exactly. Yeah. Revisit all of that. Well, listen, it's been a great chat, Dom. As I say, it's nice to have signing stuff to get our teeth into, and I imagine by the time we do another one of these next week, that things will probably have moved on again. Certainly sounds like the Berg deal is pretty imminent. Glover, Boro pushing really hard to make happen, and Silvera. So we'll see where they're at come next week. And we'll also keep the guests coming. Really enjoyed the Sol Bamba one. We've had some fantastic feedback on that. So thanks again, those of you that have listened to that. Hope you've enjoyed it. As Dom said at the start, like, subscribe, click away, tell all your friends and your fellow Boro fans to get involved. We're obviously getting nearer to the new season when we'll be cranking things up even more. But until now, thanks for watching, thanks for listening, and join us again soon for another You Are My Boro.